What's up, everyone? I'm Scott Palmer, co-host of the Big Calm podcast, here with Tara Palmer. Excited to have you join us this episode. We're going to be talking about a culture of too much. So many people out there are overscheduled, overloaded, and overwhelmed. And we want to dig into that, talk about what's happening, and probably more importantly, what we can do to help fix it and stem that tide. So let's jump straight in. So Tara, when we were meeting before, we talked about this idea that lots of people are just feeling overloaded and like so much is coming at them and from so many different directions, and it seems to have gotten worse with the pandemic and the aftermath of that. I think people are busier now than they ever have been. What are you seeing out there, and how is it
Yeah,
affecting
I guess
people?
it seems like there's just so many good opportunities in many ways in the world that we live in today that it is really hard for people to kind of sort out maybe how to prioritize different things in their life, how to create a life that's full of good things, but maybe not overflowing with them to the point that they can't keep up. And so that's really a part of what we want to get into talking about today is just how too much of a good thing is still too much and the implications that that has on the nervous system. So,
And are you seeing people? I mean, the way I set this up is people are really experiencing that maybe in a deeper way than they have before. These things maybe have accelerated. Are you seeing that just out there in conversations and in your office as a therapist? And how is that playing out for people? Are they is anxiety up? Are they stressed out?
yeah,
What's
I
what's going
guess
on?
to be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the pre-COVID, post-COVID implications of everything. I tend to, in my own framing of it, see it as even pre-COVID, we saw a lot of families kind of maybe overscheduled in a variety of ways, and then we layered in COVID and just everybody's nervous systems trying to find maybe in Deb Dana's words, rhythms of regulation that matched that time period and how do we stay regulated and maintain our well-being, and then now kind of like post COVID having to reacclimate to a world that maybe opens up more possibilities than we had during the COVID window, and then having to find rhythms of regulation to support that activity again. So I think there's those pieces. I think there's things that we also are noticing with regard to just all of our devices and the effects that our devices are having on us as well. And so there's kind of these maybe overcommitments in terms of what I'm loading onto my plate with my schedule, but then also my ability to not overload my system with too much information, maybe because of the access to our devices 24/7. So those are the, I guess I would say, maybe the dominant variables I see impacting people.
One of the things that we talked about is this idea that this big question: do you own it, or does it own you? Because I think a lot of people have lives that maybe, or parts of lives that they don't feel like they really owned, or like they authored themselves. It sort of just has accumulated over time, and they find themselves in a certain spot, and maybe they feel like, to a certain degree, their house or their car or other commitments have kind of are in the
Right.
driver's seat, no pun intended, in a way that they themselves, maybe if they could wind the clock back and mindfully kind of create their future, they maybe wouldn't have sketched it out that way. So what are you seeing in terms of sort of lives and how stuff can end up owning people to maybe a greater degree, and the relationships gets reversed and maybe a little bit toxic
Yeah,
even in
I don't
certain
know. I guess what
cases.
comes to mind, maybe as a starting place in answering this, is just even our own experience of, I think, if we go back to times when our boys were young and wanting to provide good things for them, right? Like, and the questions that we had to ask ourselves regarding, like, how much of a house can we afford? Or what are we pursuing in our careers and why? And how much of our energy are we going to give to those things, in a kind of with the intention in mind of like making sure that we have enough energy to kind of pull back into the family, and just knowing firsthand how complicated it is sometimes to find the answers to those questions. Because I think most of us as parents, and I guess I'm speaking to maybe like other people who are sitting in family systems with kids in this specific referencing, but um, man, we really want to do well by our kids. And so, and then we just live in a world right now where there are so many opportunities for our kids. You know, there's a lot of us live in homes that are larger than previous generations, and what we provide in material ways with regard to those things are more. The activities that our kids are signing up for a lot of times are more in terms of the level of involvement, and they're more in terms of their cost, they're more in terms of their time, they're more maybe in terms of their reach, with kids traveling and all of those pieces as well. And so there's just even kids who, you know, we've certainly dealt with needing to access like occupational therapy or different resources like that in our family life. And so families who maybe have some different needs that they're dealing with their kids also have access to more. And so those layers factor in. And so how do we decide which of those things are the things that we want to be investing in, and when too much of a good thing is still too much? I think those are the places that I see, you know, again, like our own lives having been affected, and where we had to continue making mindful choices, kind of making our best call every step of the way, and continuing to be aware and adjusting in real time. And then certainly things that I see a lot of families dealing with, of trying to make these decisions, and maybe having a tendency to overload their plate, again with the intention of trying to do well by their kids.
So I'm sure there's no perfect answer, but what when does the stuff become too much? So there's lots of things that we to your point, things that we can do, and things that maybe in low doses or in moderation can be, you know, very healthy. Things like, say, exercise or having a social life, or maybe even unwinding once in a while after work with a beer or something. But all of these things can be taken too far. Do you see that happening with some frequency? And like, how do you know
Yeah,
what's too
well, I think
far?
it's such a good question, and it's a question that can't be answered with a simple um, piece of advice. I think because each of us are kind of wired up in our own unique ways. We each are kind of maybe refueled by certain things versus drained by other things. And so, what might be restorative in one person's system might be more depleting in another person's system. And so, there's not a quick and easy answer to that question. And I would say, if I were to put it in a nutshell, maybe it is noticing the impact it's having on our nervous system, because it's really about the accumulation of things. And so, as I'm moving through my day, I'm experiencing like energetic um, shifting going on. And if I've had too many stressors that are maybe kind of like piling up on me, I may be having a harder time finding my way back into a resource state, or gaining access to how we've been talking about the ventral energies, which are those resourced energies that help our mind body experience know that we're safe. And so, to the degree that I know that I'm safe and I'm experiencing a little bit of stress, or I'm safe and I'm facing a challenge, I may be still in pretty good shape. But at some point, if I'm so stressed that my nervous system is having a really hard time hanging on to a felt sense of safety, things are going to start unraveling on me. And they're going to start unraveling both in terms of my own ability to cope with the things that I'm trying to continue to stay engaged with. Again, whether that's like staying focused in my workplace, whether it's picking up my kid and running them to their next activity. My ability to be fully present is going to be compromised if I'm getting into enough of a protective energy state in my nervous system. And then that doesn't even account for all of the uh, contagious energy things that we've been talking about in our recent episodes. And so if my nervous system is stressed and now I'm picking up my child and then they're picking up on my stress and now maybe they're having a stress response to my stress and then we're kind of pinging off of each other, there's all of these things that are going on for people. And so coming back to like in a nutshell, if I'm managing to stay regulated and resourced with the things that are on my plate, then I'm probably in a space where the things that I'm selecting for myself and my family are, they're just good things. But when I'm getting into the zone where too much of a good thing is still too much, I may be crossing over into that place where we're facing a pretty chronic stress pattern, and that contagious energy is becoming more co-activating than co-regulating on a regular basis, and our like individual systems and our family systems are having a hard time finding their way back to feeling safe, secure, present, enjoying each other's company, just having like that high quality experience that we all want for ourselves and each other.
It occurs to me that a lot of what you're describing in terms of activity and stress and overwhelm might very much be related financially. So many of these things have like a price tag attached to them, an actual monetary. They all have a price tag, but some of them have actually a dollars and cents price attached to them. Do you see that kind of correlation? Is there a lot of people that are dealing with say that kind of life that you're just describing, and then it also a symptom of that maybe is financial
Yeah, I mean, I
stress
think
and
it can be
overwhelm?
kind of a vicious cycle that gets going, right? Where if I want to provide certain opportunities for these great things, then I might feel this pressure to keep trying to do well in my career and make more money so that I can provide more things. And then I might be also riding this line of, am I creating a buffer space, financially speaking, where something can, I can afford for something to go wrong, if you will, without the wheels coming off of my financial situation. And so I think there are a lot of people who are extending themselves to their limits or overextending themselves as they're trying to provide these good things. But then again, the nervous system implication is if I can't stay resourced, am I really providing good things? Or is the net effect maybe taking me in a direction I don't want it to? But absolutely, the financial stress or the financial implications play into kind of how that whole situation can kind of feed on itself, I think.
So it occurs to me too that you only have so much time. It truly is a finite resource, and that by choosing to do certain things, we're making trade-offs and not being able to do other things. If we, for instance, work more hours, that's time that we can't be spending with family or in pursuit of hobbies or anything. Do you find that are people largely aware of those trade-offs? Are they not aware, and life just kind of creeps up on them and they find themselves living in certain ways that they wouldn't have chosen? Or how does that come into to play here, this idea
Yeah.
of trade-offs?
I guess a phrase that just came up a minute ago while you were talking was kind of an idea of like living outside of our means. And that maybe it's easy for us on a certain level to see if that's happening financially, although I'm not sure people are mindfully responding to those awarenesses as much as we'd hope. Um, but also living outside of our means energetically. And so if I,
Mm.
to your point, am telling myself like, okay, well, I don't want to live outside of my means, so I'm going to pick up this part-time job, or I'm going to push harder in this part of my career, or I'm going to do this next thing to make some more money, but now I'm pressing outside of my energetic limits, or the limits that allow me to maintain closeness, quality connection in my family system. Can I really afford to compromise those needs without a pretty big price tag, no pun intended, attached to that? Um, so if I think of some of the softer things that happen in life, when we're not pushing, when we're not like, okay, I'm going to go out in the world and do this thing to enhance my career, make more money, give my kid this opportunity, and we're not out there doing, but we're maybe kind of like at home being with ourselves, being with each other. That there's just a different quality of experience that happens in some of those maybe kind of like softer energies, and the energies of, if we get into nervous system language, the place where there's maybe a pairing of the ventral energy and the dorsal energy, where we can be relaxed and we can achieve intimacy. Um, so yeah, so I would say that's a part of what's going to go missing if we're always pressing into our limits.
And I think you used the phrase something like a buffer, in the like financial sense. Like you don't want to be planning to spend every penny that you make or more than you make. You want to have some sort of buffer for savings and emergencies, and just to live and enjoy life. I think what I'm hearing you say is like that same concept would apply to other areas of life too. We want to have an energy buffer. We want to have a relational buffer. We want to have some slack built into our life so we can relax and not be constantly kind of living at or over the edge. Is that
Yeah,
a
and it
fair
feels like even
synopsis?
the fact that that's a part of the conversation, maybe is a symptom of how much this has become a problem I guess at least through my lens in society, because we become so focused on the things that we're doing, and maybe assigning a value to the things that we're doing, and we're maybe losing touch with what it means to kind of have that the being part of ourselves. We're human beings, we're not human doings. And but there's oftentimes so little reflection around what it means for us to sit and be with ourselves and know each other. And so I think absolutely there has to be that space built in, this buffer, if you will. Or really, I would suggest that, maybe we need to even budget time for being, and that even that, it doesn't have to be considered like a buffer
Mm.
space. It's like a priority, kind of an experience that we're trying to build into our lives. Because I guess my mind is going to being a young kid, and like what happened on the lazy days of summer, when you're sitting around and kind of like in the voice of my younger self. And I think a lot of the peers that I was surrounded by, like, oh, there's nothing to do, we're bored. um, but that kind of energy, that place of being with each other, being bored, so often is kind of a birthplace for creativity, and where we're co-creating with each other, and we're being inventive, we're experiencing things that we wouldn't, in that pre-packaged world where we, I don't know, let's say go to an amusement park, or we go to a planned sporting activity where the coaches are telling us what to do versus us creating our own flow with what to do, so to speak. And so I just think there's a lot that we end up missing out on knowing ourselves in some of those ways. And I would continue to call those more intimate ways of knowing.
Makes sense. Some of what we're talking about here with sort of the financial and this idea of like energy and life energy reminds me of a book I read, I don't know, maybe a couple decades ago, called Your Money or Your Life. And we don't have any affiliation with the authors or anything, but did want to put a plug in for that to our listeners. And one of the main concepts of that book was this idea of life energy. And when we're working or doing things that earn money, we're making a trade, and we don't often think of it that way. We think of like, oh, we're going to earn this money and get this paycheck, and then we have these bills that are over here, but we don't think about necessarily how much life energy did we put in order to buy that car or to buy that dinner out or to do that kind of thing. And if it was profound for me to translate my time and my energy that I was putting in. So let's say I have an average job and I get paid, I don't know, $30 an hour, but after taxes and everything, I maybe make $20 an hour. And then if you factor in the idea that in order to have this job, I've got to pay gas, and I've got to, maybe have an upgraded wardrobe. And so pretty soon that 30 became 20, and now that 20 becomes 15. And then I realized that, okay, I'm actually getting about $15 an hour. That's what I'm actually putting in the bank at the end of all of this. And then I'm going to go out and buy a car or a house that costs $1,500 a month, maybe, for a mortgage. So I'm literally working 100 hours in order to be able to afford that house. Or I'm going to go out for a dinner that costs $75, and I just worked 5 hours to get that $75 dinner. And was that really worth it? And there's much more to the book than that, but I just wanted to plug that and put that out there, because it really fundamentally changed the way that I think Tara thought about income and expenses, and that's a lot of time to be spending in order to do some of these things. And would I be better off spending that time or doing other things with that, in my example, the 5 hours that it took in order to pay for dinner? So
Yeah,
anything you
I
wanted
think what
to
kind of
say about
jumped
that?
out for me as you were talking and saying, was it worth it? Is I think I love that question, and I love it because it can be answered differently by different people, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a part of what makes us all unique and create, like, each of our lives are going to look different, I think, if we are living according to some of those principles and we're kind of coming inside and asking ourselves those questions. And so I guess in my conceptualization of this is really all about learning how to live mindfully and aware of some of those types of principles that you're talking about. But then exactly what does that look like for me to apply that to my life versus you to apply it to yours? I mean, like, you're a foodie, so your $75 dinner is probably going to be worth it for you nearly every time, right? Whereas in my system, I don't know that I'm
Right.
making that trade, but I might go buy myself like a new lamp because it's going to set up this ambiance in a room that you could care less about, right? And so there's just these different things. But to your point, like the energetic trade offs of where are we investing ourselves and why, and how easy it is for us, again, to just kind of keep getting pulled into this mindless way of living, because there's so many maybe like shiny objects all around us. And so and maybe coming back to what I was saying earlier on, with regard to all of our devices being right in our hands, and we're all super aware of how much marketing is coming our way, always has been, but it's the volume is just intense, and the way it's targeted specifically to our interests and all of those things, I think, are probably taking a toll on a fair number of people, in terms of just like impulse responses to different things. So yeah, so I think it's just huge coming in back into these principled ways of operating and slowing down enough to ask ourselves the question, of like, what am I doing this for and why?
Yeah, we'll leave the coaching and the life advice to you, but I will just put out one challenge to folks listening to this. Instead of thinking about things in terms of dollars as you're going about spending things over the next month or so, think about it in terms of hours that you had to invest in order to buy that thing. At a minimum, it'll be really interesting for you, and it might possibly change kind of your life and how you structure things and the choices that you make. So my challenge would just be, again, think about how many hours or how much time did it take you to pay for that dinner, to pay for that car, to have these different kind of experiences, and was it worth it? It might be worth it to you, to Tara's point, and it very well could not be when you start transferring things and thinking about it like that. So I just wanted to switch to this idea. One of the things that we talked about is a lot of folks, this idea that when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And the idea that when you say yes to something, that there are trade-offs. There are things that when you say yes to something, there are things that you can't do. So could you talk a little bit about that sort of prioritization and the cost of yes, if you will? What does it cost to say yes
Yeah,
in
I
different
mean, I think in
scenarios?
many ways this ties back in with a lot of what we've been discussing, but looking at, I guess, a really common thing that I see for people is getting um, deeply involved in their kids' sports and maybe travel schedules and the financial implications of all of that. And so, if I'm saying yes to all of those things, and particularly if I'm a family where my budget is being stretched maybe close to its max, what are the things that I'm saying no to? And so I might be saying no to having just quiet time with my kid where we get to talk about, even things like these life principles that we're discussing here, of like how many of us are taking the time to sit down and provide guidance and life skills and all of those things for our kids. And so, not in any way to undermine the value of being a part of a team and some of those other positive, like less tangible aspects of being in sports. But then there are maybe things that are not going to come just from that path that we also have to find a way to build in otherwise. And so, I guess the place where I see families really struggling is when they're not finding that space to build in those other things. Families are sometimes giving up their financial well being in a certain way. They might not be looking ahead to college and what's going to be needed in that next season of life because they're so concerned with providing just what's in this immediate moment for their kids. They might miss out on, I don't know, I guess if I would say like some of the quieter family vacations where they're not being, they might be traveling, let's say, to who knows, North Carolina for a trip for a sporting event, and they're building a little bit extra time, but really everything's getting built around that sporting event. And so some of the other experiences that they'd maybe be gaining access to if that activity wasn't so central, um, uh, go missing. And so, again, it's like we've been talking, is it going missing mindfully, where a family says, yeah, but we do think, we find creative ways to build in those other things. And when we look at the quality of connections available to us in this experience, it's really high. It's not for everybody, but it is for us. We're living in our means, and so we can afford to do this. And it does feel like it creates balance in our family system. Then great. That sounds like you've got two thumbs up according to your own assessment and you're in good shape. But if you're a family that feels like you're just being run ragged by these types of things, then taking that time to notice what are the things that I may be saying no to without the awareness, and how could I, if I start thinking of, if I let this go, this thing that I've told myself we absolutely have to do, we have to have, like, there's no way that our little people can have a good childhood if we don't push ourselves to do these things, that maybe we want to slow down for just a minute, and think about, like, well, if that literally became inaccessible to us in some way, how would we then go about creating good memories, good learning opportunities, good social connections? How else would we help our kids? I don't know, enjoy their lives and learn the things they need to. And I just think there's so many creative ways that we're losing track of. Because simple things like having a bike or going bug hunting or baking cakes or some of those things that we could do with a lot less expense and a lot less structure attached to them, maybe aren't being utilized as often. And there's something, there's again just kind of a different quality that maybe goes with some of those experiences that we don't want to completely lose sight of.
That makes sense. It reminds me a little bit. Over the years, I've heard numerous people who are very smart and very capable of doing mathematics talk about how they have their kids super involved in sports because it's like their kids' path to college. And I can think of one example that is really striking. There was a colleague of mine who had done the math and had spent about $30,000 in the previous year for two kids to kind of have, I think it was lacrosse and or hockey, to have those kind of experiences you described, where they wanted to get into these like elite youth things and travel all over the country. And it occurred to me that if he were to take, so it's 30,000 for two kids, if he had taken 15,000 each and just stuck it in a savings account, like a college savings account, college would have been paid for. The kids were pretty young, so that money would have grown over the years, and probably with just 1 or maybe 2 years of that, the kids would have been, college would have been paid for. So this really wasn't about college. That was what they said. I don't know if they believe that or not, but do you find that a lot of families and do they come up with, is there some justification structure built around this, and what's that about, if there is that
Yeah, I don't know. I
justification?
guess maybe for some people it's genuinely a justification, and that's a good word for it. And for other people, I think it might just be they believe it, right? To your point of like that's what's necessary in order to get from point A to point B. Whatever, maybe they're telling themselves like, well, that's how you learn how to participate in community. You have to be on a team. Maybe they tell themselves that kids who aren't involved in these things get into trouble, right? They're just almost like destined to end up, struggling with drug use or you name it, right? And so there can be these belief structures that kind of underlie why we're doing what we're doing. And and again, depending, there's nothing wrong with some of those considerations being factored in. Do our kids need productive ways of engaging in the world and have a sense of meaning and purpose, the ability to master skills, the ability to socialize and coordinate their needs with other people? Like all of these things are good, but the assumption that that has to take on a very specific form seems like the piece that maybe sometimes we're losing track of. And so that ability to maybe look at the underlying, like what's that underlying value? What am I actually trying to accomplish here? And then being able to step back and say, and is this really the best pathway, all things considered, when I'm looking at the stress it's creating, and maybe some of those things that I'm saying no to when I'm saying yes to this thing. Um, so yeah, I don't know. So I guess I wouldn't necessarily use the word justification just because I don't think it's always that mindful. Yeah.
Sure, sure. What so I'm sure you encounter a lot of folks in your office who are in the middle of some of this, where they've got maybe multiple kiddos and they're kind of going all over the place, and um, maybe they've identified, maybe it's not a problem at all, and maybe there's other issues that bring them in, but maybe it is a problem and they've either identified or only semi-identified it as a problem. What kind of advice and guidance do you give to individuals or couples who come in and they're kind of feeling ragged and overloaded and overwhelmed and aren't sure what to
I think a
do?
lot of it starts with some of these mindful considerations, trying to get anchored back to your own values. And, if you have to kind of list out like what are your priorities in life and why, different things are going to drive different people, different family systems. And that's maybe again a part of what makes us all unique in a way that's desirable, but we probably want to be pretty aware of what they are. What is it that's driving me? And And then am I in alignment with that? So if I'm setting up, like if I think of one of our core values as a family, I think we've always tried to keep our eyes on balance. Does that mean we've been 100% balanced every step of the way? No. But it does mean that when we start getting really out of balance, we've kind of got our eyes on trying to sort out what's going to help bring us back into a better balance. And so just having something that simple where there's this principle operating that we kind of keep front and center as we're making different decisions can make all the difference in terms of, um, again, like kind of coming back to our nervous systems and what's shaping our decision making. So that would be my first thing, is people just getting kind of connected to like, what are we doing and why? um, and then shaping those values, like identifying the values and then starting to shape their priorities around it. I'm probably not going to say this perfectly, but I think you being a business guy, earlier in our relationship, you had talked a lot about like mission, vision, and values. In relation to different organizational structures. And I think we work to apply some of that to our family life. And so it's really easy to let kind of maybe like social norms start driving our energy expenditure rather than coming back to ourselves and asking if those social priorities align with our personal priorities or our family values. So
Makes sense. And then if I layer in the concept of return on investment, not in a financial sense necessarily, but how much energy am I expending to get this, and what's the outcome of having expended that energy, and is it worth it? Am I getting more out of it than what I put into it? That could be another really good concept for folks who are used to thinking in business terms. Anyway, I
yeah.
think those both would apply here in this concept. Yeah. Um, so maybe I'll flip this a little bit. So I talked about when people are coming in and they're kind of in those situations and maybe are trying to figure out and weigh the pros and cons of changing things up, or maybe dropping a sport, or taking a different job, or lowering their hours, something like that. How about like maybe young people who either haven't started out, or they're maybe recently married and they're trying to kind of define these things and figure out what kind of life they want to lead and what kind of family they want to create. What advice or guidance would you have for folks who are like getting started
Um,
with some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's complicated in the sense of, again, the answers are going to be so unique to probably each individual and each couple. If we're talking about a couple kind of getting started in the world, I think talking maybe to other people, observing other people, leaning back on their own experience in childhood and noticing how certain things worked for them, right? And so, did they come from a family that was overextended in certain ways? And then, what impact did that have on them? So, they're kind of building that mindful awareness around um, the historic impact and what natural adjustments would they find, being cautious of not swinging to the opposite end of the continuum necessarily, because that can be kind of a human nature tendency. But just kind of looking for that balance of, if my family ran every which direction, did I value that? If so, what about it did I value, and why will I choose to repeat this? And if it was too much, if it was kind of the too much of a good thing is still too much, then maybe kind of just starting to do some reflecting on how will I still attend maybe to some of those things my parents were trying to do in our family. So I'm not letting go of certain principles altogether. Like maybe I want my kids also to be engaged socially. I want them to learn how to cooperate with other people. But if I want to manage time differently, then what kinds of activities might be allowed or not allowed? Um, how much time are we willing to devote to those particular things? Maybe flipping that question, how much time do we need to protect in order to have some of the human being experiences we were referencing earlier. And so we can kind of come at that question from both sides, and sometimes the answers turn out a little bit different when we're reflecting on them from those different angles. So but yeah, I think a lot of it can be shaped by looking back and seeing what worked and what didn't work for us as we're trying to create a blueprint that's going to guide our own journey.
I like what you said too about observing or paying attention to or having conversations with people who are maybe further ahead from a life stage perspective, and kind of seeing what works and what doesn't for you, and seeing like what are the things that they did and the choices that they made that led them to this place 10 years, 20 years, 25 years in the future. The other thing that hit me when you were talking is we're never going to be watching TV or YouTube or whatever and see a commercial that says, hey, carve out time for family, or don't buy this, or be really mindful about your choices. It's always going to be buy, different things. And then even in our family, we don't think of them as commercials, but we sort of get commercials from our parents or from others that say, hey, this is the way to live. These are the things you do. This is the blueprint. And so let me, advertise, if you will, that blueprint to you. And so if you're only looking at commercials in the traditional sense, or only hearing commercials from your family, it could very well be that you are presented with a false choice, that you have to choose one or the other, or maybe they're both the same thing, but you don't realize that, hey, I can author my life in a completely different way. So I wanted to close with that. Any final thoughts here as we wrap up this episode?
Great place to end.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. Make sure you like or subscribe, and join us next episode when we'll dig into another interesting topic about life, the nervous system, emotional health, other cool stuff. So thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
This podcast represents the opinions of Big Calm and our guests. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on our podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Podcast content should not be taken as medical advice. All content is for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional with any medical questions. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient or therapist-patient relationship. Privacy is of utmost importance to us. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect confidentiality. This podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care in a legal sense, or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast. The contents of our podcast and related show notes are all copyrighted content owned by Big Calm LLC. All podcasts and show notes that are distributed to the public for free can be redistributed via hard copy or electronic copy for free, only if Big Calm LLC is included as the acknowledged author within the actual media that is redistributed. This podcast is owned by Big Calm LLC.